Hello everyone, Madness Without here. Today we're going to be talking about how to learn Redstone. Let's get started. So I want to start off by saying this video is how to learn Redstone efficiently. It's not necessarily how to be good at Redstone. This is more focused on the learning process. But we will be learning a decent bit about Redstone itself in this video. So let's start off with some clocks. We got a couple of different designs here, and unfortunately for a lot of these circuits you're gonna have to just memorize them, and it sucks, but I will do my best to help you get through the logic with each of them. Right here we've got just a simple repeater clock. The lever is in its powered state, which unpowers the torch, which then unpowers all the repeaters. But if we turn off the lever, that allows the torch to turn on like it usually would, which then lets the redstone current flow through the repeaters back into this block, which then unpowers the torch, which then unpowers the whole system, and so on and so forth. Next we got a pretty simple clock. It's probably the fastest clock that we can make. And we got a comparator here put in subtract mode as opposed to normal mode. And you just flick the lever on and there it goes. One thing you'll notice when using this clock is if you just take a repeater output directly from it, then the repeater has a tendency to just stay on. The way we can fix that is just put a redstone line a little bit out from the clock and it'll function as normal. So the way this clock works is the comparator in subtract mode outputs a signal strength from here at a certain strength and subtracts this signal strength here that it's getting inputted from the side from this one. It then makes a new output which is equivalent to 0 that you can then take a reading from with a redstone line. Here we have a pretty simple clock. It's just two hoppers feeding directly into each other. You just put any old item into one of the hoppers and then take a comparator output from one of the hoppers. It doesn't matter which one. There you go, you just got a clock. Here we have an exceptionally long clock. It's probably the most complicated that you'll need to make unless you're doing some crazy redstone stuff. The way it works is it locks one of the hoppers so it can't feed any items back into the other hopper. But while this hopper is locked, say this hopper is locked right now, this hopper will feed all its items into it. And then once all the items are moved into this hopper, then this comparator will no longer be taking an output from here, so it'll shut off, which then unpowers this piston and lets this piston get powered to move the redstone block back over to lock the other hopper. And you can just take a redstone output from either here or from here. You can add in a bunch of items to make it longer, or you can take out a whole bunch to make it shorter. It's all up to you. It's super adjustable, super easy to use. Next we got monostable circuits. You can use these to make one-tick pulses very nicely. Here we have a rising edge monostable circuit, which will make a one-tick pulse at the beginning of the button press, if you can see that. And here we have a falling edge monostable circuit, which will create a one-tick pulse at the end of the button press. There we go. The difference is just falling edge makes it at the end, and rising edge makes it at the beginning. The way the monostable circuit works is you press the button, it powers the repeater, which then powers this block, and this block will power the piston and this repeater at the same time. But because the piston will extend, this block is no longer powering the repeater, and this repeater will shut off immediately. Here we have another design for a monostable circuit. We got a dropper pointing up with any item in there and a hopper feeding directly back into it, with a comparator taking the output from the hopper. Just so you know, it does not generate a one-tick pulse. It's just shy of it. It's a little bit longer. Now you got to be careful about where you place the button. I'm not sure why, but you have to put the button on the side next to it and not on the dropper, because you get a much longer pulse if it's on the dropper. And I can't seem to figure out why. If someone could tell me, that would be fantastic. Here we got a T flip-flop that makes use of the fact that sticky pistons tend to spit out their blocks when they are powered by a 1-tick pulse, and it puts a monostable circuit directly behind a sticky piston with a block, and the block gets moved over the torch, powering that repeater there. There we go, we can see it functioning. You press the button and this stays on. You press it again and it stays off. Here's another T flip-flop, but this is just based off of a falling edge monostable circuit instead of a rising. So it will generate the same results, except it will do so at the end of the button press instead of at the beginning. There we go. Here we have a pistonless T flip-flop, and we just got a dropper facing up and a dropper facing into this dropper with 2 hoppers pointing over and then back down. And the way this one works is you just put any old item in there, and when you press the button, it'll put the item up into this hopper, which then moves it over here, and then back down into this dropper, and then this comparator will take the output of what's in this dropper. Then when you press this button again, as you can see, the item is in here. Then when you press the button again, it powers this dropper, which will also power this one, to just put the item back into this dropper, which turns off the circuit. We also have another version of the T flip-flop, but with 3 droppers. We got one facing into this dropper, and we got one facing up into that dropper, and this dropper faces into a hopper. We go and just press a button, and it powers on. And then you press it again, it'll power off. Nice and simple. When it's off, whatever item you put in here will be sitting here. Here we have the RS NOR latch. It's pretty simple. You can see everything that goes into it right here. The way this one works is you can press this button to turn off this circuit, which then turns this one on. And then you can press this button again as much as you please, and nothing will happen all day long until you press this button over here, which then flips this off. Then you can keep pressing this button all day long, nothing will happen. It's mainly used in things like security systems. There's not much else to it. Next we've got double piston extenders, and this is a super basic design, super simple, super slim. Makes use of 2 repeaters, one set to 2 ticks, another set to 4, and a redstone line just going directly into this block here. If you flip the switch, you can see that this piston gets powered and then this piston gets powered. And then when you turn it off, you can see that this piston unpowers itself, pulling this block in, and then this piston will unpower, which pulls this piston in, and then this piston gets repowered for a brief moment to grab this block and yank it back. So the way this one works is when you flip the lever, the power will go into this block first, but this block will not be able to power this piston. And then it will go into this piston right here, and then finally into this right here, but this is a little redundant for extending. When you go to unpower it, this loses power first, so it retracts this piston, and then this loses power next, which retracts this piston, which can then retract that piston. And then this is the final one to lose power, and it still has power just in time for this piston to get here and see, oh, it has power. So it extends, and then this loses power moments later, retracting this block and pulling it back in. Here we got another design of the double piston extender. This one is flush with the wall, so if you want to use it and keep it hidden, this is the way to do it. So when you flick this lever will power this block, and this block will power this piston when it gets moved here, and it'll power this redstone dust, which powers the repeater here, which will also power this block and this dust will power that block and that piston. And this repeater will function much like this repeater does. It's kind of pointless for extension, but when you go to retract, you'll need it. So when you unpower it, this block will then be unpowered by the lever, which lets that piston retract. And then current will flow here, unpowering this dust, which unpowers this piston, dragging that piston back. And then finally, this repeater will be unpowered after this piston is back here, which then lets this piston be powered for a moment to pull that block back in. So here we've got a double piston extender that is flush with the floor. So if you want to hide it underground, this is the way to do it. So when you flip the lever right here, it'll power this redstone dust and power this repeater, which will then in turn power this piston, causing it to extend. And then just moments after, this redstone torch will have turned off and this one will have turned on, which powers this block up here. And this piston, which is then moved into this spot right here, will be powered by this block, causing it to extend as well. And during the extension phase, this does nothing. When you flip this lever to retract it, the first thing that will happen is this torch will turn on, which in turn turns off this torch, which unpowers this block, unpowering that piston up there. And the next thing that will happen is this torch will power this repeater, which powers this piston in this monostable circuit. It's just like what we discussed earlier. This one is turned sideways, that is all. This repeater will be set to 3 ticks, so it is not generating just a 1 tick pulse. And while that is happening, this repeater will have turned off, unpowering this piston and pulling that second piston down here. And then this redstone dust will turn on for a brief moment, because that is a monostable circuit, remember. And it'll power this block for a brief moment to power the piston that moves down into here, which allows it to go up and grab that block and pull it back down. Here we have the double piston extender flush with the ceiling, and it works just the same as the one that's flush with the floor, except it makes use of a different kind of monostable circuit and a little bit different wiring. So when you flip this lever right here, it'll power this redstone dust here and this up here. And this redstone dust will not power this piston because it is pointing sideways and it is not pointing at the piston, but it will power the block down here. That's why this redstone dust will power this piston before this piston over here gets powered, because the repeater makes it slower up here, but there's no repeater, so it's faster down here. So this block will power this piston, which will push this piston down into that spot down there. And then that piston here will be powered by this block, which will then extend that one. And then when you go to retract it, the monostable circuit will go off because the torch turned on, powering the dropper, and put an item into the hopper, which gave an output to the comparator, powering this block for a brief moment to extend this piston and retract it. And all that happened after this came unpowered to unpower that piston, and it happened after this was unpowered to unpower this piston. I did a pretty bad job at explaining that, but I hope that works for you. This piston here is set to 2 ticks. Now we've got pulse extenders, which are pretty simple. You just hit the button, and then when the button clicks off, you still get a little bit of current going afterwards. It makes use of the comparator's ability to take different power inputs and output a certain power level based on what it's getting input from the back. Even more useful is you can extend the pulse even more by just adding more comparators. Don't put them on subtract mode. There we go. And now it stays on for quite a lot longer. As you can see, it's slowly fading out. Here's a different style pulse extender. This one is called an ABBA gate. And when you press the button, it clicks on and then it clicks off, and you still get a little bit of power coming afterwards. The way this one works is when you press this button, it will power this repeater and almost immediately power this redstone dust. And when these repeaters get powered, it'll take a little longer for them to be powered, and it'll pass on that current. And just when this button unclicks, unpowering this repeater, these will still have a bit of a current going through them, and it'll pass on that power to your output. Alright, that's going to be all for today, folks. I know I'm not the greatest at redstone, but I hope I helped you figure out how you can learn it and how you can make sense of it. If you liked the video, consider subscribing, drop a comment down below, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to let the madness pull you in.